Our last conversation of the day will be rethinking it all in high school and higher education, as well as exploring new methods for jumpstarting the transition of young women to the STEM workforce. It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Katie Burke, Chief People Officer at HubSpot, Alec Resnick, Director of Powderhouse Studios, Joan Reede, Dean of Diversity and Partnership at Harvard Medical School, Katherine Newman, incoming Vice President of Academic Affairs at the University of Massachusetts, and our own Steve Clemons will be moderating this conversation. So
Hey,
Steve.
good morning, everybody. I'm glad you're here. Thank you very much. Yes, you can applaud them. They're good. I just wanted to take a moment because I think this is a very, very interesting. I've had the benefit of having a list of all of you, and it's an amazing array of people who've attended today. Some of you have flown in from California, from Denver, from all over. You're at universities, you're at nonprofits, some of you are HR chiefs, some of you are at private firms. And so this is an incredible moment. I hope, a couple of years out, people can say, hey, remember that Atlantic Dell Forum where, we got together, something happened. Katie Burke has written, and I've read a lot of what you guys have said. You got to diversify your network. So I want to say one thing real quickly, that after this is over, you have a little time. Many parties you go to suck because no one introduces you to one another, right? You go in, you don't know anybody. Pretend this is your party. This is your day. You've spent a couple of hours with us, that you own this. Meet somebody you don't know. That'll make us very happy. We have Intel here, Salesforce, Uber, National Grid, Dell, Biogen, Philips Healthcare. There are a lot of private companies. If you guys can't solve this problem, then I'm not sure who can. So I'm just saying, just take an opportunity to meet somebody you didn't know. Maybe it'll be lousy, but it might actually be, someone interesting. So I hope you'll do that. Hey, thanks very much, guys, for spending some time here. I wanted to I was so fascinated by how good everyone else was on the earlier panels. They're good people, they're earnest, they're moving notches up a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the ruthless way to win in terms of getting more people in there and identifying who are the villains in the way, what are the best practices, what science do we need to think about. And Katherine, I want to start with you because you've been talking a bit about the science of how to get this right. So moving beyond creativity and fun, I'd like to know if I really wanted to have a change in 10 years where people no longer need to have women in STEM forums, what would we have to do?
Well, at the University of Massachusetts, where we are quite dedicated to cracking this code, we think that there's a science underneath all of this, and it derives from the study of social psychology, which is the field that studies human motivation, it studies perception, and these turn out to be highly manipulable precepts. So let me just give you some examples and why they work in the classroom, which then pumps up the pipeline for all the corporations that are here in the room. If you start with the belief that talent in science is innate and immutable, then when you hit a setback, you immediately assume this is because I'm not in the category of potentially successful people. But if instead you rely on the work of social psychologists like Carol Dweck at Stanford, who has argued that we need to push the idea that it's mutable, it's changeable, and it's about effort, not about innate ability, you change the vector of a student's experience in class, and you increase their desire to be retained in this field. So if I hit a setback and I think, oh, well, that's just a setback, I have a very different view than I think, I hit a setback, it means I am not suited for this because I'm female, because I should be getting out of this field. You have a completely different vector of experience. How do you change that mindset? Well, one thing you can do in the classroom is to reward people for revising their work, right? Instead of just, it's that test at the end of the semester that determines how well you did, you make everyone in the class turn in their work, they get compliments, they get criticisms, they turn it in again and again and again, and what you reward is that persistence and improvement, and the message that sends is anyone can do this.
So do you folks do that?
We are doing this, and we are trying to depend on these observations, again, driven from social psychology, to change the way we deliver the curriculum, which in turn is changing the persistence of women in STEM. Let me give you another example. Everybody has been talking in this session and elsewhere about mentors. What happens if you have a different composition of your mentoring labor force? Well, one of the things we've done is take our introductory engineering courses, and we have randomly assigned students to mentoring groups where there were women mentors and male mentors, and we can see that when you have female mentors The female, and nothing else is different, just the gender of the mentor, the vector of the students in that mentoring group is entirely different. The persistence of women jumps way up when there are female mentors. What about if you have research or problem groups? Students in engineering and science work in teams all the time. You put one woman in that team, and she tends not to do all that well by herself. You put two women in a team, and all of a sudden you get a completely different vector of persistence for the women in that group. So, this is a way of saying there is a science of social psychology. It tells us a lot about perception, about self-understanding, and it's manipulable. Its findings are manipulable in the classroom setting, and that in turn affects persistence. I think later on we will see that the same principles would hold in corporate work groups. Right now we're worried about the pipeline, so we're applying these ideas in the Institute for Diversity Sciences at the University of Massachusetts.
Thank you for sharing that with that, this notion that there's an underlying science. I sort of feel like there's, like I said, there's an underlying science of good parties and good party hosts and getting networks broadened and, you know, diversifying your networks. And Katie, I was very impressed when you were sort of talking about, you know, calling on people to kind of further diversify their own networks. But just in terms of responding to Katherine, and you're in the real world, you're developing a product, you've got a business that operates in this arena. What do you feel is the deficit that's missing out there for maintaining the track from resilience, I guess, as you just put it, sort of a resilient stance of women staying in this arena?
I think the biggest deficit is actually creativity to address some of the problems that have existed. So corporate diversity and inclusion programs have existed for 30 or 40 years in their current form. And I actually think one of the biggest challenges is thinking that people in the C-suite, like myself, have all the answers. I think that's a huge mistake. And I actually think the most important work that any of us can do is actually ask some of the people on the front lines what they want most and give them the creativity and autonomy to solve it. So I'll give you two examples. Two of the most powerful forces in transforming our women at HubSpot initiatives have come from frontline female engineers. One of whom noticed that in the interview process, go through the technical test, we're having conversations, let's say Alec and I are talking about things, often you end up talking about your side hustle, which is a web app that you've built or something similar. And you can imagine it engenders right away this, like, we have something in common. We have made something we care about. And people's eyes light up when they've made something that they care about. We noticed a pattern that a lot of our female CS graduates were often really focused on the academic part of their work. So they were really proud of their portfolio, their grades, that sort of thing. Often they were athletes or musicians in their spare time, and so they weren't hacking away on Friday nights at different projects. They were probably at some really good parties, I hope. And so one of our female engineers got together with one of our female recruiters, and we designed a weekend build a web app workshop where women who were in CS formally could build their first web app. And that way, when they came into interviews at tech companies, I would love it if they ended up at HubSpot, but anywhere, they would have something to talk about, and their eyes would light up, and they'd have recent applicable experience to share. And so I say that to say that sometimes we in the C-level overcomplicate things. And we think about, what will the media say about this? What will our lawyers say about this? What will all these people say about this? And instead, I actually think sometimes if you hand over the reins to frontline employees to creatively solve it, they'll come up with far better ideas than anyone else. The second idea came from, I think visibility really matters. I think everyone in this room thinks visibility really matters. We talk a lot about the problem of visibility in women in tech, but we don't often empower frontline employees to change it. So we had a female engineer who was super passionate about Wikipedia. She basically said, if I ask young women in coding boot camps globally who they admire as a female engineer or who they admire as an entrepreneur, the same white male names come up. How do we actually change that? And so we empowered her to set up a Add the Women Back event where we literally just said to people, set up a Wikipedia account, learn about a female entrepreneur or engineer, and celebrate her. And as it turns out, Wikipedia now has hundreds more entries from our employees and our leaders, including our male leaders, to build visibility. And then we tweeted at them. We were like, hey, April Underwood from Slack, you're awesome, and we just wrote you a wiki, like you have a wiki article. And she wrote back and was like, wait, what is this? This is awesome. This is so cool. And everyone should know who April Underwood is at Slack. She's amazing. And so what we did was we basically said, we don't have all the answers. Let's empower you to find solutions. And we found much, much better progress by actually giving people the tools and creativity to take the issue on head on versus sitting in the C-suite and sort of wondering from the ivory tower how we're going to solve this.
So is it your sense that things are going so well in the right direction, you're succeeding so well at Wikipedia, so many more people are getting called out that we don't have to really worry about this much? Or do you think there's actually more of a load that we have here that we actually do? I'm always worried, is gravity taking us the right place anyway, or do we have to tweak gravity to get to where we need to be to have just a more inclusive, more fair? I mean, I was taken by Karen Quinto's numbers when you're looking at 2 out of 10 end up in these pipelines or at certain positions. I was interested in the fact that compensation in this sector is so much higher. So apparently the compensation side of it is not enough of a draw, or there are barriers. So do you think because of the steps you're seeing that are positive? Because I love positive, feel-good stories, but I am a journalist and I also thrive in darkness and cynicism, and I want to know, what do you really?
We love that about you, Steve. He started this off being like, who are the villains? This has all been nice. Who are the villains?
So in terms of moving to beyond the feel-good things that are going on, what are the other things? If you had a magic wand and you would change something, what would that be?
So I think you've asked the penultimate question, which is, are we winning or are we losing? And I think that's a question all of us struggle with. So if you are a woman or a man who cares deeply about the front lines of this issue, I think you ask yourself that question virtually every day. I think the key is balancing persistence and patience and celebrating some of the good work that's happening while actively asking everyone to do better. So to your question, do I think I have it all figured out? Do I think we at HubSpot, do I think we in tech have it all figured out? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. But do I think that if I were a young woman in the 4th grade deciding whether to consider tech, and all I heard about were the problems and the issues and how terrible it is and the harassment, that I would choose it as a career path? Heck no. And so I think we need to actually look 4th grade girls in the eye and say, not only do we believe in you, and the curriculum is important, don't get me wrong, and how we talk to the young girls is really important, but so too, they are smart. Part of the reason why they want to and aspire to be like Beyonce is because, frankly, her world looks really cool and fun and exciting and interesting. And so one of the things I think we need to do is, I am all about truth-telling. I am all about shining a light on the things that we need to do better in darkness. But I'm also very aware that in 4th grade, all you want to do as young women is belong and aspire to something that feels relevant and cool and creative and interesting and dynamic to you. And so if you feel like there's only bad things happening in the world of tech, no matter what we teach young women, it won't be what they choose to do as a profession. And so I think we need to balance that good news with the bad news, because young women want to do really amazing things, and I think we need to give them the autonomy to do it.
Thank you so much. Joan, I love your story. You wanted to be in science, you wanted to be in medicine, you were in high school, you knew kind of where you wanted to go, what your goals were, and you had a high school counselor that said, no, you shouldn't really go to Brown University. You ought to go over this way. I mean, you had a crappy counselor, so, and you've been working on it. I love the story just of what you've done, but I'd like to get yours, because there is a villain in your story that you kind of overcame, in my reading of it, if I were telling your story. How would you tell your story?
So this is an issue that is part of a story about it being a woman, but it's a large part about being an African-American woman. And that's part that I haven't heard in this discussion, this intersectionality, this race and ethnicity and ability and disability and socioeconomic status, and how those play together with being a woman in terms of lowering expectations and raising barriers. So what you're referring to is, in high school, I decided I wanted to go to Brown. I reveal my age because I wanted to go to Pembroke, which then became Brown. And when I went to the guidance counselor, I was told, you'll never get in. Nobody from our school has ever gotten in. Nobody from our town can get in. You can't get in, do not apply. And the part that I haven't heard here is the role of family and how you are brought up in terms of possibility. Because for me, anything I wanted, I could do. Would have to work hard, would have to struggle maybe, but I could do it. And my response was, did you just tell me no? So I applied to one school. And I sit here as a physician. I clearly got in a school. And got accepted to Pembroke, but went to Brown and graduated from Brown. So part of this is about also not just what's offered in the school or programs, but what is offered in the family and the kind of role models and the settings and what people have. And I think this other issue of intersectionality. Oftentimes, when I am in conversations about women and advancing women, what is left out are these issues of women of color. And they are left out of the conversation. And so how do we, who are doing this work, expand our vision of how broad the problems are, so that when we create these images, we're creating diverse images. When we're creating these programs, we understand that the struggle is not just how I'm perceived as a woman, but how am I perceived as a Black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever it may be. How do we think more broadly about this? And then the other part is, how do we make sure that when we're talking to that student or we're going in, that they see some people that look like me? That it shouldn't be that it's always the white man or the white woman important. It's part of reality that's coming to talk with them. But they see people that they say, wait a minute, I could do that. I could be you. So this intersectionality is important.
So how do you do it? I know it's important. I was telling some of our friends at Dell last night about the Washington Ideas Forum, which the Atlantic just had in Washington with the Aspen Institute. And to be candid, we had great leaders that are dealing with racial questions, the founder of the National African American History Museum. If you look at our audience, it's not what it should be. It's not what it should be. So I called Maya Rocky Moore, who happens to be the wife of Elijah Cummings. She heads a think tank. She's very worried about, many of these same questions, women, opportunity, networks. So I called her and I said, I spoke at your Future Wealth Conference and I met these amazing African American women, entrepreneurs throughout all companies. I said, look, it was Sunday, the conference starts Tuesday. Go to the site, type in my name, it's free. And so we had offered to 1,000 women, and it completely changed the nature of our conference. That's why I said today, meet people here that you might otherwise meet, because we created that network. I don't think I would have done that, as honestly, if I hadn't known I was coming here to do this. And I was sort of interested in Joan and the fact that you're responsible for diversity, community partnerships, broadening. So I know it's important, but how actually do you do it to sort of reach community? What are the methodologies? I mean, I'd like to give people a nuts and bolts answer when you're sort of thinking about changing the game, moving the needle. Give us a framework, understanding of network, what you think are the keys to you succeeding or not succeeding.
So I'm going to start with the example you just used. If I look out at this room, and it's a beautiful room, and you've talked about this diversity of positions, there is not a lot of racial ethnic diversity in this room. And in many of the rooms and spaces where we go, there is no diversity. So I'm going to start with a space of open our eyes and look out and say, who is not here?
Right.
And oftentimes we just accept it. So you can't say in one hand, I want and value diversity, and the other hand say, when I don't see it, it's okay. So the first part is questioning, who's here? Why are the people that are here here? How did they find out? How did they get invited? What is the process that's being used to bring people in? So bias doesn't happen by accident on these types of things. You have to be very deliberate and intentional and look at both the processes, the methods, who's coming, why are they coming and not coming, and question and reach out. Part of what has happened, and it's not just in your forums or these other spaces, we have a society where parts of our society are excluded. And what you're saying to people is, I want you to continue to just knock on the door asking if you can come in. And what I'm saying is, you need to open that door and say, welcome in, which is what you did.
Yeah.
Which is what you did. So I think a part of this is acknowledging that. I think a part of this is creating spaces where people can not only come in, but have a role, are visible with the role. So they're speakers. They are planners. They are leaders. They are moving into spaces where they are helping set the tone for what happens. So it's not, I can be invited, but I can have a seat over here and not do anything and not really say anything. It's how can I be truly included and not just an image.
Terrific. And I know you deal with a kind of broad ecosystem. And Alec, I want to bring you into this because I know your job is, you got the weirdest job up here, I guess. You're deconstructing schools and building them from scratch.
Yeah.
Unions must hate you. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't impose my own kind of potential drama in your world. But I am interested when you kind of look at this broad question of, you've heard a lot here about creativity, reaching communities you wouldn't otherwise reach, and creating and changing the environment to actually, what are you learning when you're putting schools together in new experiences in terms of how that influences the track and choices that your young students eventually get on?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start by going back to your framing of like, who are the villains? I'm sure there are many, but at least two of them are men and schools, in my opinion.
Men and schools, okay.
And I'm starting a school, so like some of my best friends work at schools. But in particular, I think one thing that school does, especially with STEM, is that we draw a black box around it as STEM, and then the question is, how do you bring people to STEM? We very rarely revisit the question of how do you change STEM so that it might get into other arenas that might not normally be seen as STEM. So the work that we've done historically before we were starting a school as an after-school program provider, we had the flexibility to think about how do you make more creative, expressive, interesting experiences that we had the luxury of not framing as STEM experiences, even if the schools that were hiring us thought, great, we can check the STEM or STEAM or whatever box. And I think that revisiting uses of technology or math, so that you're not just thinking about how do we dress up math, but what does math do? Forget about trying to get everyone to math. What are the uses that somebody might care about math for that aren't just about their long-term professional career, but might be about making a gift for somebody, might be about all the applications, some of which we've heard about already, but where you're not approaching it as like I don't know what a good analogy is, like a cough medicine metaphor, where like, we know the medicine doesn't taste good, but we're gonna dress it up to make it taste good. So I think that's one important thing that's really very coupled to how you train teachers, to the fact that school's often structured around subjects. It's very hard to change that. And I think another way in which school can be a villain is that unlike maybe in the workplace where you can control a lot of the boundary conditions, in Massachusetts, 93% of licensed teachers are white, for example. And when you think about the statistics for people who teach, especially in high school, math and science, you have kind of similar levels of disparity. And so if you need to revisit your staffing model in order to create that environment, like we can have a conversation about what the pipeline in graduate schools of education are and so on, but if just today you want to work with 30 to 40 kids to do something different, you have to address a lot of those organizational questions. Then on the men's side and the boys' side, I guess, I think something that's often underappreciated is rather than talking about how do we make this more attractive to women or girls, I think there should also be a conversation about how do we, it's a good way of saying it. Well, I think dick is a synonym for jerk for a reason. So, and I think that there are conversations to be had with boys.
That's a zinger here.
Well, so basically, okay. I mean, especially when you're talking to kids whose like fathers are engineers, for example, they'll come in and they'll be like, this programming language is better than this one, and they'll tell people who are just getting started, like, don't do it like that, this is how I do it, and they're learning their own version of machismo, right? And I think that there are conversations to be had about how do you set up spaces where that's not the case. There are conversations to be had about how do you teach staff how to shut that down. There are conversations to be had with families about how do you have those conversations at home, right? That you don't want to end up engaging, not necessarily in a blaming the victim conversation with, say, girls in your school, but structurally a kind of a theory of change that functionally puts all the responsibility on the people who are kind of suffering the consequences.
Can I ask you a question? It's, one of the frustrating things about this subject, for me, to be honest, I mean, I love what you both of you just referenced, the family and the home. Sometimes some families are not supportive. Sometimes the neighborhood kids grow up in are horrible. I used to work when I lived in Los Angeles. The young boy who was in school, I was his mentor, tried to do this. He ended up getting shot and killed, named Delvine. And he was just in a terrible thing. He was a wonderful, wonderful child. He really, really wanted to move forward. He was excited about politics. He wasn't a science guy, but he was a science guy. And his life didn't end up going in the right direction. But I'm interested in the fact that sometimes, Alec, as you just described it, got to get in the family, I kind of agree with that in a way, but I know America's not really like that. And I want to go back to this. There was a lady over here asked us, do we need to be a little bit more forceful, compelled? Do we need a little bit more rigidity that just said, you know what, we're going to make it equal because we're going to impose a system in the schools that creates tracks for women at an earlier age? I kind of grew up in Japan. Japanese schools are not fun. But you got a lot of scientists. You go to Singapore, you go to China, you go to India. There are, in fact, more women in STEM over in all of those countries than there are in the United States. And so I'm just interested in, not to be too forceful in it, but what do we do for the crappy environments where you can't affect everything in terms of building resilience among young people to a certain degree so that they can take on things. Is that an unfair question?
No, not at all. I mean, I think part of so I don't know the answer, just to be clear. But I think part of the conversation that we worry a lot about is actually twofold. So one is that I think if you look at a lot of the rigid solutions, whether in school or elsewhere, one of the prices you pay for that rigidity is that for every scientist that's created, there are a lot of people who decide, actually, I never want to see science again, right? That's part of where we got the problem that we currently have to a lesser extent here. So even if that might succeed, and you might net increase the number of women, say, who are scientists, if you say, we're going to go back to the Sputnik era and we're going to make sure that everyone knows, like, this is what you do. I just don't think, just speaking as a practitioner who is friends with the kids they work with, that I'm not comfortable doing that to some people. So that's one piece of the answer, which isn't like a systemic lens on the situation. But I think the other piece is that I don't actually care that much about more people getting into STEM in the abstract, right? I care about STEM because it's powerful, because people can make more money doing it, because it's involved in many important conversations. It's not an abstract thing.
Right.
And I don't know how you would reconcile those two conversations of, I want to give you power, but actually you're not involved in this conversation, right? So again, I don't know the answer, but one of the things I really appreciate about school as an institution is that we don't have to operate at a 50,000-foot level.
Right.
The conversation about how do you have that conversation with a family is actually a conversation about how do I get to their house.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Joan?
So there's a piece in here, and I think oftentimes when we use the word family, we think of a traditional family.
Right. There aren't a lot of them anymore.
There aren't a lot, but there are lots of ways children have family. And so you can start to think about grandparents. You can start to think about adults who are meaningful role models and have a significant role in people's lives.
Right.
You can start to think about community as family. So when I think about ways to get to youth and ways to engage youth, sometimes it's through the church. Sometimes it's through the Boys and Girls Clubs. Sometimes it's taking it where the youth are and the organizations that they trust. So it's not how do we sit in our beautiful buildings and say, oh, come in. It's about how do we also reach out? How do we partner with others in our community and other organizations who care equally about these children, but maybe not have the resources we have or have the understanding? So how do we partner, collaborate?
Katie, real quickly before I go to the audience, does that resonate for you? Do you when you have the science, and I know you're trying to promulgate and export these practices out, which are I don't know how that's going, but when you've heard from our colleagues here, do you have that same sense, or do you wait for them to get inside the ivory tower before you begin working on them?
Oh no, a land-grant university like the University of Massachusetts is never in an ivory tower. It's pretty deeply engaged in how curricula are organized, how mentoring's organized. They're deeply into the K through 12 schools. I was interested, Joan, when we were talking before we came up here, in her work as in pediatrics. The doctor's office is another place where the potential for helping to educate families about what they can do for their children is rich. I think what we need to do is understand that all of the experiences that have been outlined here do have a scientific underpinning to them. There's a reason why mentoring makes a difference. There's a reason why a Wikipedia image makes a difference. And if we understand more about how that's working, and by the way, the original research on this had nothing to do with women. It had everything to do with minorities. Claude Steele's work on stereotype threat, its whole beginnings were around why we were missing so many minority kids and what happens when you go in to take a standardized test, which is another one of those barriers. If you believe that a standardized test is a measure of your intelligence, you will perform in one way, and if you're told it's a measure of your interest, it turns out the performance characteristics are completely different. So again, these are manipulable ideas about what leads to success and failure, and if we dwell on them and learn how to work with them, we will see people elect these career pathways, which are highly rewarding, and open up more opportunities to them. So I don't think this is an ivory tower enterprise, but it is an enterprise that begins with a recognition that there are regular ways in which we can test these ideas, and then they can be applied and effectively applied, and they will move the needle on whether or not women and minorities stay in these fields and persist in them against frustrations that everyone in them experiences. If we talk about the successes, behind every success, there's always somebody who's had a setback. I'm sure you've had them as well. But if you interpret a setback as something that you can get over, that's very different than a signal to get out of the field.
Right. Katie?
Yes, echoing what's already been said, I think the other thing in addition to leaving our buildings is really challenging the notion of sameness as success. And so I think what we look for in traditional interview processes, what you're really looking for is that this confirmation that this person is like you in some way or like the people on your team. You're looking for social, intellectual, academic signals that this person is in some way, shape, or form similar to folks who are already operating successfully in your environment. Turns out that's a terrible way to hire people and to evaluate their long-term success. And so I think for companies, it's about looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, why are we thinking about culture fit versus culture add? Why aren't we looking people and saying, what are you going to challenge? The question that I ask most often in our interview process is, we have a really strong culture. What are you going to add to it? What don't you like? About what you've seen and heard about our culture, what would you challenge? What do you think is a problem for us? And I want people to have active answers to that. Part of the challenge with traditional interviewing processes is you're basically saying, Steve, how much are we alike? If we're alike, pass go. And obviously, to Joan's point, that has huge implications for communities of color. It has huge implications for folks with physical challenges and abilities. It has huge implications for our LGBTQ friends, and I think we can do better as companies.
Thank you very much. All of you have been fantastic. Let me open up the floor for comments, questions. Yes, right here. Hi.
Hi. So
Tell us who you are.
I am Usha Singh, working at National Grid with Andy.
Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Part of the strategic, I'm in the IT field, but I'm a geologist by profession, I guess. I'm from South Africa. The first geologist qualified in South Africa and the first female geologist to hold a cum laude. And then, of course, the first that was invited for a full ride to Oxford. I have 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy. My question is, so my kids have had a very seamless ride into the STEM field. I was involved in Illinois in building a new high school and the whole STEM progression, but also including some of the arts in that. So my question is there a profile that we can hone in the early years, that we can develop different nurturing streams to propagate these individuals into community leaders and the professional
Interesting question.
track.
Profiles, nurturing plateaus. I mean, a different language sounds similar to somewhat of you've been talking about intervening at certain points to do this. Is there such a, I don't know, plug and play system for kids, or would that be a big mistake? Katherine?
So one observation, if you have a project group that has 1 woman and 3 men, the likelihood that the woman will emerge as a leader or a minority will emerge as a leader is much lower than if it's 2 women and 2 men. The patterns of communication, the patterns of confidence, the ability to surface your talent is inflected by the composition of those groups. That's true in the classroom, that's true in research groups, and I would be willing to bet that's true among children as well.
Fascinating. Joan?
So there's a part of me when I hear of moving people down certain pipelines, there's a part of me that sort of sits up and says, what? Because I actually think of a way a good friend of mine, Woody Myers, put it, our children as pluripotential stem cells that can go in any direction. And part of the problem is they don't know the directions that are available to them.
Right.
And so how do you start to give them this permission to explore, this permission to say, I can create a space for my interest. So an example is there's a program, Biomedical Science Careers Program I started over 25 years ago that's about identifying high school through graduate and postdocs and helping them to understand how to gather information, the kinds of options that are available to them, broadening their sense of STEM. So for me, and matching them with mentors and advisors. So for me, the high school student who says, I love science, but I love writing. And to be able to say, you could be a science writer, okay?
Right.
That's not a pipeline I think of naturally. It's how do you open the door so that they can help think of that? And that's part of our challenge in how we do it. So for me, success is not every student in my program has to go to medical school. Every student has to find their own place and what excites them.
Pluripotential stem cell?
Pluripotential stem cell.
I love that. That's tweetable, folks. I mean, we could start a new hashtag out there. It's a lot of characters, but yes, one question right here. Yes, right.
I'll go.
Hi.
Hi, Melissa Donovan. I'm from Southern New Hampshire University. My question is about scalability and also accessibility. And one of the things that I face as Associate Dean is that I can't always get the information to the masses like I would like. So my question is, for the panel, how do you see this sort of virtual asynchronous type learning being implemented so that we can start to close some of these gaps? Do you think that's a
We're right near the end, so we'll be lightning round. Alec, scalability, accessibility.
Sure.
I would also put affordability. I mean, when you think about we want stuff to go viral,
Yeah.
You've got a lot of money that just dropped on you from
Sure.
Laureen Powell Jobs to go invent this thing. So I wonder if you come up with a great idea, will the system be able to absorb it, replicate it, change it, make it work for a lot of other folks?
I mean, ask me again in 10 years. But when it comes to scalability of these types of interventions, I think something worth keeping in mind is what I was mentioning earlier about STEM. You can talk about them as a set of subjects, but I think then you end up in the conversation about pathways. And the reality is that we've had textbooks for a long time. We did TV shows. There are lots of scalable media. And the types of issues that people run into, whether stereotype, threat, or otherwise, that move them off these paths are not about bad textbooks. That's part of it. They're not about bad MOOCs. They're not about Khan Academy. Those things can help and enable different models. But to me, the question of scalability isn't how do you make this happen all under one organization, but how do you make some of the types of human interactions and relationships that are going to keep people's relationship to these disciplines healthy? How do you scale those, even if it's not all under the umbrella of one organization? Like you can have many independent coffee shops without having one big coffee company. And I think one of the roles that blended learning and kind of similar technologies to the kind of space that we're talking about offer is that somebody who doesn't necessarily have domain expertise can act as a mentor or a coach. They can be a meaningful person in somebody's life, even if they don't have that background. But I think that's a much subtler design problem than most people kind of give it credit for.
Katie, I'm going to give you a last word in responding to this, but I also want you just 30 seconds on, you've built so many networks, you've changed things with Wikipedia, you've thought, in this HubSpot way about networks. If I gave you 5 years not to do any of the other duties you have right now, what networks would you go build, particularly in the private sector?
So we have talked about going to physical places where children are, and I would echo Joan's comments around churches and athletic stadiums. The reality is where most people go for answers is the internet. And so I actually think we get events like this make us excited and energized. As human beings, there's something we all love about a cocktail party. But the reality is that someone who identifies as a first-generation American, if they're looking for information on how to become a science writer, they're going to go to Google. And so the construct that we've built at HubSpot is physical events are great. Everything needs to be accompanied by equally helpful content that anyone, anywhere, at any time can find and access and create value from. And so the construct that our founders have outlined is the notion of being shockingly helpful. One of the sentiments I always feel in these events is everyone wants to be heard. Everyone has a story to share, a problem that they're trying to solve, or information, frankly, that they have that's unique or programs they care about. Often they wait to come to events like this to share those. My ask of each of you is, I would love to spend 5 years just focused on this, and I have a lot of big plans and ideas, but so too do all of you. And if they live only in your head, women, the thing that I always say to women about creating content is most of their most important content and voices are in their drafts folder. And they stay in their drafts folder because we don't have the confidence to put our voice out there and say, I'm going to stand for something, and you might disagree with it, and it might not be perfect, but I'm going to do something cool, and I'm going to stand for something. And so I think the most important networks we're going to create are not in physical places. They're on social media and they're in virtual networks. And I think the most important thing everyone in this room can do is share their story. I would not have met the first female geologist from South Africa. Now I have. But I would love for that to be a blog post that anyone can find. So as they're thinking about how they could combine science and content creation, they would know your story as well. So I would encourage everyone to share those stories, because the young women we're talking about trying to inspire, they live online. So give them compelling stories and content that they can gravitate towards and learn from.
Thank you so much. Katherine Newman, University of Massachusetts, Joan Reede of Harvard Medical School, Alec, Resnick, Tearing Apart Schools, Powderhouse Studios, and Katie Burke, HubSpot. Thank you all very, very much. Very fun conversation.